Hi there. Welcome to the Neurotrition Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Z, your holistic dad doctor, bringing you the ultimate mind and body approach. Today, we've got Ashley Jones as our guest, and we're going to be talking to her not only about her own health, but the journey of her son who is on the autism spectrum. And thank you for tuning in. Ashley, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have you. We've had to look back. I think you were pretty much started working with us when maybe a year or two in practice. So I was pretty fresh at that time. And so I really want you to just tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of, what you've gone through as far as not only in your own health, but, what you've experienced with your son.
Yeah, it's been a while. I would say probably 2012 is when I got connected with your practice. Very quickly, I had fibromyalgia. So I was living in constant pain every day and had been to Mayo Clinic, had lots of doctors. I also have thalassemia, which is like sickle cell. And so lots of kind of weird things going on that doctors really couldn't help me with. All they were able to do was give me medicine that just made everything worse. And I was newly married and just said, I am not going to live like this for the rest of my life. And fortunately was able to connect with your office and started going down a health journey, realizing that what I ate and what I took into my body could actually resolve the issues I was facing. So that's how I got started. And then
Right.
That changed my life very, very quickly. So I think we started off with removing gluten. I was very allergic to gluten. Then sugar, which I am allergic to. Within like 3 days of removing gluten, I was a different person. Most of the pain went away at that point. So I was a believer very quickly in what we were doing.
And so, yeah, and we, and it wasn't necessarily a linear increase, right? I mean, there was definitely some ups and downs throughout that journey.
Yeah.
And I was, when you got pregnant with your son, tell us a little bit about that, and then because I know that wasn't necessarily on your radar, was it?
No, it wasn't. So I had so many years of feeling just not functioning that I really didn't think I could have kids. That might not be in the cards for us. So
Right.
I I got so well that I got pregnant with Gordon on accident, and that was awesome. All of this has just been a God
Yeah.
thing for us. We didn't know what God had in store, and when it happened, it was just like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And I still feel like if I had not been well, that probably would not have even happened. But yeah, through changing my health, through supplements, through the chiropractic methods that we went through in your office as well. Like, I was no longer in pain. I was fully functioning person, and so then to be able to have a pregnancy and to be healthy through it, and
Right.
that was just a miracle for us. So yeah, it's when I say this type of alternative therapy, the nutrition, it has changed my life. Like I mean that. I truly mean that.
And that's really incredible, to give people that idea that those are other things out there that you can be doing to optimize your health, to kind of get to that next level where you want to be in life. And, I'm really curious because I have my own story about this, once we had our son. And even as a provider, it's like, talk about deer in headlights. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And, so you're really dependent on those pediatricians really early on to be your guide, right? Of, what's normal, what's not. You can read books. I can look at textbooks. I know, I was taught generally, what should be happening, milestones and that kind of different thing. But it's never always that clear, right? Would you agree with that? I'm really curious about when you noticed there was maybe an issue and what your experience was communicating that to your more traditional providers and what that looked like?
Hindsight's 2020. And
Absolutely.
so now that I know what I know, now that I understand what those red flags are for autism, I realized that we had signs on day one of his birth. We had clear signs on day one.
And what did those look like?
So he could not nurse. He had tongue
Right.
thrusting, which even the nurses couldn't identify that, which was ridiculous. But the poor thing couldn't nurse at all. That never happened for us. So that didn't work. He had digestive problems. They had to put him on a bottle immediately, which was of course milk based, and of course he had a horrible reaction to that. So we had digestive issues with that persisted, with severe constipation for a very long time. He did not want to be let down. We were constantly holding him.
Right.
They say sleep when they sleep. I slept holding him. There was not a moment that I was not holding my kid. And it never looked like what other moms looked like with their kids. Shortly after that, as soon as the milestones started creeping up, he wasn't moving as quickly. He
Right.
didn't want to crawl as much. He didn't want to walk like all the other kids in playgroups were walking. He wasn't. COVID hit, which was a nightmare for all of us parents, especially those of us with kids who were bound to struggle a little bit. And so then all of a sudden we were isolated from everyone. Then came verbalization issues, and that was really tricky. He would say a word and then forget it. And that really scared me. I remember he could say more. And then all of a sudden one day he couldn't say more. And I remember just freaking out. How do you not know how to say a word,
Right. And what do you do about it, right?
Yeah, what do I do? I'm Googling it, and there's nothing online about it. And it took us, we went through early intervention, we went through early steps, which I recommend to absolutely everybody. Just if you're unclear, just do it. There's no drawback to it. Just do it. You get help, and you don't have to have a diagnosis. You're just getting help for where your kid is. And so we came to realize that he had childhood apraxia of speech. So he was struggling to make those sounds. Even though he knew it yesterday, he couldn't get it out the next day. And we had some behavior issues as well, clinging to me, screaming. He didn't want me on the phone. He didn't want my husband and I talking. Things that just other parents weren't dealing with. And I kept saying, you don't get it. You don't get it. And I knew that you had a son on the autism spectrum. We were already seeing you for nutrition and chiropractic help. So I talked to you very early on about it, and you said, let's just see, what we can do to help. And so not having to have a diagnosis, but just being able to get help where we were was so important to us. And we started it, I think, 2 years with you.
Right. And, early steps, for those who don't know, that's I think it might be. I think each state might have a version of that. Mm-hmm. I think it might be more federally funded. I'm not sure about that, but it is, something where you can go in and get early testing, get speech therapy and occupational therapy and different things of that nature. I'm curious, did you have to seek that out though? I mean, was that kind of recommended to you, or did you kind of have to find that on your own? Because I know we kind of found that on our own. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had other parents who eventually told us, but we really didn't get a lot. I mean, I still get frustrated to this day going back and saying, oh, he's just a boy. You know what I mean? And so he's 18 months old. And I'm like, okay, I can understand that boys, that language may come on not as quickly. But, I mean, he went from having 10, 15, 20 words to 0 words. So that, to me, is a super red flag.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It was ultimately frustrating that I didn't get more aggressively pushed in that direction. Yeah. And especially for you during COVID, because I think it's important for a lot of people to realize, and look, COVID, it was what it was. I'm not here to, go back through all that, but, when kids are born neurodevelopmentally, their right brain is developing first. The right brain is the social brain. It's where we start developing nonverbal communication. And the nonverbal communication is really essential to develop our actual, verbal communication. That has to have first. And when we have everyone wearing masks, kids don't see faces, they don't see facial expression, especially at that critical age. I mean, all they're seeing is their parents' faces, which is good. I mean, that was at least something. But they're losing out on getting that social nonverbal communication at a critical stage. And I think we're going to see a lot more of those delays. And like I said, there was immune compromised people. Everyone had a different story during that time. So, we're not trying to go all into that necessarily, but I think that's a critical thing to remember, especially if you had a young child at that age and they're struggling with social engagement in general, something I think that was heavily affected. But, getting, and I can't stress this enough to parents, my biggest recommendation is listen to your gut, especially the mom's gut, okay? Mm-hmm. Dad's guts are kind of 50-50, but the moms in particular, if you feel something's off, there's nothing is going to hurt from doing some early interventions. There's really not.
Yeah.
And it's okay to disagree with your pediatrician. That is allowed, actually. Yeah. I think some people feel like they're not allowed to disagree, but you are. Yes. And so I'm glad you sought those out, and you were in a unique position, I would say, that you already had some exposure to things outside of traditional medicine, but a lot of people aren't.
Yeah. So absolutely, I agree 100%. And to your point, like, the only reason I knew about early intervention was because of your office. I paid attention very, very well with whatever you said with your son. I was picking up on it because I was tracking, our journey was tracking your journey, and you were enough ahead of us that you were able to distill some of what you were learning to me when I was in the office and I was asking your wife, who's wonderful, about what she was seeing.
She's the only reason things happen.
She's amazing.
The reason this place is still standing.
She's amazing. But I've learned from you guys that in our special needs community, we have to share what we know, and that's one reason why I am working on a book for parents of special needs kids. It's from the Christian standpoint. How do we go from expecting one thing with our little one and getting something different, and then how do we go through that grief process to acceptance and joy with what God's given us? So I have been digging into these topics as well, but you're right. Early intervention is something you have to seek out. I mean, with COVID, there were so many balls that got dropped.
That was even a harder time.
I was on the phone every day just trying to get through to get somebody. You have to be a mama bear. And if you're a dad, be a daddy bear. You got to be aggressive for your kid because nobody else will. Our pediatrician, you talk about pediatrician, our pediatrician was basically non-existent during his years. So anyone we talked to was like you said, well, he'll be fine. It's still early. Well, interestingly, when we finally did see a speech therapist, he was so far below where he should have been. It was scary. So there's this process we go through in speech. We don't just all of a sudden say words. There's a process, and there's so many steps. And one of those steps, I remember clearly, one of those steps is being able to mimic animal sounds. And so, or any sound, but you read books and, the cow says moo and the horse says neigh. And there's a reason why we do this, why these are things in books, because you're getting that mimicry. And I remember the speech therapist saying he can't mimic animal sounds. Like, that's where we are. We were down there. We were nowhere near him being able to speak. And it was a year before he was able to actually speak. So, there are a lot of well-meaning people who say, he's fine, just wait and see. And I've learned that is the absolute worst recommendation you can give a parent. Absolutely. You like you said, you have to go with your gut, and there's no harm in getting help. Absolutely none. Especially at that age, there's not even labels. You're just getting help. That's all it is,
Yeah. And I tell every single patient, I could care less about the label. I could care less about what the lettering, and you probably see that response with me all the time, because you've even done that. Like, well, they think he has this, and I go, It's not that I don't care about the label, okay, But I care about what's happening in the brain, right? Where is the immaturity? Where is the imbalance that's creating that symptomatology? Even to your point, talking about not being able to mimic animal sounds and all those different things that are involved in speech in particular. I mean, there's everything from the muscle tone in the mouth, the tongue. A lot of kids have what we call lip and tongue ties, where they can't move the tongue around, and that can be some of the feeding problems, even. And it's not only that, but it's also a sensory thing. We've got to be able. It's kind of like if you can't feel your arm, how can you can't really move it correctly, right? Mm-hmm. If your body doesn't perceive that, there's a whole part of your brain, and it's all processed on the right side, where it is a map of your entire body. So even your mouth and tongue. Imagine if you went to the dentist, for instance, and they numb you up and you can't feel all that. You don't talk right? Or if you can talk at all, right? It doesn't come out right. That's because your body can't perceive it. There's this disconnect between here to here. So you'll see a lot of these kids who can't speak a word, but they can sit down at a computer and write a novel. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's where we talk more about unevenness of skills and different imbalances, but that's because they can't feel it. That's a big part of it. That's not the only thing that happens, but there's all these things involved. And I think it's just really critical, like you said, go ahead and get, whether it's just some basic OT or PT or whatever is available. And I think sometimes you got to go outside the box. And that can be problematic. So I'm really curious about, I had, I would say maybe even a privileged experience where I was able to go learn this, right? I had the access to go, I was able to read a book and say, that's cool. I want to be able to do that for my son. So I went and learned it. Now there was still, that was an extra expense. I had to go uproot my practice essentially to go do a whole new, I think it was my whole program that I took on this was almost 300 hours of continuing education I took to learn how to do this. But for you as a parent, like things that I do, or other doctors who look to see where's the weakness in the brain, how do we rewire that? How do we create a new connectivity to make that part of the brain fire and operate more how it's supposed to? What was the journey in your thought process of trying to say, okay, hey, this isn't covered by my insurance. How do I make that step what made you think this was worth it?
For me, it's kind of a weird question because it's like I would have done anything. Right. I would have done anything. My kid was struggling. Like it wasn't about us. I could clearly see he was struggling to communicate what he wanted and what he needed and how he felt, and that's very painful to watch as a parent. And when your kid has a physical need, let's say your kid can't walk, you're going to do whatever you have to do to get a wheelchair. There's no question about that. If you didn't, it would be child abuse. Okay, everybody can agree on that. There are GoFundMes for special chairs for kids, and there should be. But when it comes to these invisible disabilities, there are all these questions about, well, should you get care? When should you get care? And I'm kind of baffled by it. Why would you not get care for your kid? Communication is a basic human need and human right. And if there is a way to facilitate that, we should be doing that. I think the hang up as parents, as adults, is this idea that maybe it's just not going to help anyway.
Right.
I think that's really the hang up is this really going to help? Is my kid going to be the same kid if we go through this? We're talking about laser lights on the brain and stuff like this. And it's like, I hear this, as I'm doing my own research for my book, I'm hearing this in the community. Well, he's perfect the way he is. He's, I'm a Christian. He's perfect. I'll pray for him, but I don't want to do anything to change who he is. And I think my big response to that is he is who he is. He just needs to communicate what he wants, what he needs. There's this version of himself. I know, speaking for my kid, there's this version of himself that he wants to to share with the world, and he can't if he can't talk, and
Right.
and if he's constantly having meltdowns every minute of the day. That's no way to live if there is hope for something better. And so for me, I read some of the books too, and it was like, okay, I get it. There, at his age, at 2.5, there was this very, very, not even a chance, there was some surety that we could affect how his brain was wired, that we could give him a better chance at healing, basically, right? Invigorating that part of the brain that was weaker. That's really what it is just strengthening something that's currently weak. And
Correct.
if we would do that for an arm or a leg, why not do that for the brain? And so that was my mental approach to it. We went in it with him being young, with the intention that we would have a lot of change. We didn't know exactly what that would look like or when, but we were very hopeful, and it took a while, and they're definitely,
Yeah.
it's not linear. You had to tell me every week, it's not linear, it's okay. And to see that change occur, we would have spent any amount of money on it. I will say, for those who are still questioning it, though, we were still in speech. We were still in OT. We had music lessons. We had horseback lessons. Like, we did the whole thing, right? And I'm a homeschool mom. Like, my kid is my everyday. Every single therapist that we went to said, wow, I cannot believe he's meeting his goals so quickly. We just set his goals a couple weeks ago, and now he's met these goals. And now I have to rewrite his goals. What is going on? And every time I was able to say, well, we're going through alternative therapy. Let me tell you what that looks like. And every one of them was intrigued by it. So for me, this was a foundational aspect of his care that enabled his brain to do the things that speech and OT and music was trying to pour into him. And it just enabled him to absorb that and to grow and develop. So we still have, we've done psychology appointments. We're about to do vision therapy. I talked to you about that last week. That's our next step for Gordon, is vision therapy. And I would say, if you got to take a loan out to do it, then do it, because you're investing in your kid. Like, don't worry about his college. Worry about today.
Sure.
So he can college,
I think, I think for me to do all the things I need to do to learn this, and, you talked about, not to go totally backwards what we were talking about, but you even talked about getting through like the grief period of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was totally me. Because, I thought I was doing everything perfect, right? I was avoiding processed foods. We weren't using chemicals. I did all of the, very hippie granola stuff to try to give him the best chance. And I was angry. I think that was the first emotion I experienced, was I was just angry about it. I'll be honest, it challenged my faith a little bit in the early stages, because I was like, and then it quickly turned into like cases like this. Like, I think last time you guys were in the office, I don't think he stopped talking the entire time he was there.
He doesn't.
And
he doesn't stop.
And then I realized, no, this is a gift. It was a very strange way of being a gift. But to go back to the point of, what made it take that step for you, and what it made to have that leap of faith to go into a different direction, something outside the box, I did have to see science behind it. Yeah. And there is science behind this stuff. Yeah. And that's something I have talked about before, and we'll talk about in future episodes. But there is science behind this. But what was the changing factor for me was someone was finally able to describe the why. Yes. What in his brain is disconnected, just not firing, to end up allowing to see these symptomatologies. And so I think that was really, really critical for me to understand that. And that was motivating for me. Okay, well, if this can happen, I know the brain is still developing. Why is it? There's got to be things we can do to help start firing. And I always tell parents, like, this is not, everything I do does not replace the speech. It doesn't. You still did all those things, right?
Oh yeah, we still are.
In fact, if anything, I love working with occupational therapists and speech therapists, because they have creative ways to do things, because they're trying to get a child to do something where his brain's not firing. It's not connecting in those areas that need for that to happen. That is a such a difficult job for them. And all I'm doing is helping that work more efficiently. And I think that's kind of what you experience. So, what I always encourage to parents is, if you think there's a problem, not only that, there are a lot of tools you can do outside of just doing these traditional therapies to see if there's, is there objective signs of immaturity in your child's nervous system? And the first thing I always tell parents is, whether it's your pediatrician or, there's also a resource, something that we do in the office, the first thing I'm going to do, and the first thing I did with Gordon, was we checked his primitive reflexes, right? And primitive reflexes are just the very basic, they're the foundation of neurodevelopment. So they're these reflexes that are there for the baby's survival, and they help develop the next step. So for instance, a lot of these primitive reflexes help us learn how to crawl or learn how to walk, motor skills. And then your motor skills, your motor part of your brain, then wire into the frontal lobes, which that's where all our emotional regulation, executive functioning, basically all the things that we do as humans that animals don't, are all there. But it all works in the sequence. So you can go and have someone look for those primitive reflexes right off the bat and know that there is a weakness there and an imbalance. That's what is always a good first step to do, is have someone evaluate that and then give you a plan to start stimulating those reflexes with sensory stimulation. So we can use everything from light. You talked about, yes, we do use red light, which is our lasers, not like a Star Wars laser. Right. It's not a... My mom freaked out when I told her I was doing that on our son, but it got him talking. Similar story. It was really incredible. But so those are things that you can do to start helping those neurons fire. And to your point too, this is not about changing who these kids are. No. These kids have an unevenness of skills. They have, especially kids on the spectrum, usually have, I can go on and on about stories about kids having like genius level intelligence, but they can't interact socially, for instance, oftentimes. And so it's not about changing who they are. It's not about not accepting them. It's about making them the best version of themselves they can be. And that's exactly what I'm passionate about. And I think what a lot of the stuff we do in combination with all of these other tools. But I think the first step is, realizing, having a way to not guessing, not waiting, but establishing, where there is perhaps a weakness that we can improve on everyone's child. So I think that's really a great message, and it's neat to see, watch parents kind of go through the same steps I go through, and I'm really humbled that I've been able to be a positive influence on that journey. So I really appreciate Ashley, you coming on and sharing this stuff to me. I can't wait for this new book to come out. I'm really excited. I think it's going to help a lot of parents once you get that going, to be able to not just validate the journey, but kind of give other parents the way they kind of had would, because even my kid's journey is different than your kid's journey. There's no doubt. And also, I got to tell you, the cast iron book that you have in our office, it's everyone's favorite. It's everyone's favorite. We get so many compliments on that. So tell us a little bit more about this book's coming out.
Yeah, so it's
what can you tell me?
Yeah, so we're still working on it. I'm looking to partner with a well-known author as well. Actually, it looks like 2 books. One will be a devotion for parents of special needs kids, and then another one will be that kind of a walk-through playbook. How do we go from that initial moment of denial and blaming and anger when we first find out that that our kids are going to have to struggle a little bit more than what we planned, down to hopefully that period of acceptance where we realize that our kids are exactly who they're supposed to be, but how do we support them through therapy and all of those things. There's a wonderful book called Not What I Expected by Dr. Richtenstein, and that's one that I recommend to all parents with kids of any kind of special need, whatever it is. And my book is kind of leans into her book. She talks about that grief process, and so mine is kind of, okay, well, what does God say? How do we approach that from a God standpoint? We went through all those same emotions that you did, Dr. Z, and I'm just thankful that we were where we were. I know that we were in Tallahassee when we were, because we needed this care for Gordon. Like, it makes me emotional, you know, like we wanted to move for years and we didn't, like, we just couldn't move, and we're like, why are we still here? And then, you know, Gordon came along and we were starting to struggle, and I was like, oh, okay. So we were just there. It was just perfect timing. It was the perfect place. I know not everybody has access to you, but there are other places that offer these types of resources. And you know, you can't wait till your kid's 12 to start asking questions. You have to do it when they're as young as possible to really get that benefit of what the treatment offers. So I'm just a big proponent of that.
Yeah, and there is also something else that I think parents should be, after you get, so I think the early steps is like at like 3 years of age, or so. Is it 2 or 3? You tap out.
Yeah. It goes up to pre-K now. They extended it up to pre-K age.
And then, you know, when you do pre-K, if you don't do a traditional go into the school system, there's also Florida Empowerment Scholarship that we are a provider of as well. And the way we do that is we have an occupational therapist that we basically do a brain-based occupational therapy with those kids. So there are resources out there, and we'll make sure we share some of those different things. But I really enjoy you taking the time to share your story. I think it's a really it's humbling to hear it, and I'm just so thankful you allowed me to be part of it. So thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. Thank you.